bring up our keynote speaker now. This is Tracy Osborn. She is a designer, developer, author, and entrepreneur. Am I saying that correctly? Okay. And so she, our keyword, kind of the theme and keyword that we came up with this year is energize. And she's going to come up here and kick us off and energize us to go forth and build on an open source platform. So help me welcome Tracy.
Hi, I'm Tracy. Back in the day, I started a really hard to read username, so I'm daring on the internet. It's daring, not darling. But then any service like Twitter, Mastodon, anything, you'll find me on there. And I call myself a Californian that's now in Canada. I live in Toronto, Canada now. I grew up in California. And I've been to Nashville before, but for a very quick trip, and it's really awesome to be here, especially in this like freaking gorgeous venue. Like, check out this venue. This is super, super awesome. And like mentioned, I call myself an entrepreneur, and that's because entrepreneur sounds so stodgy and stuck up, and I like to add a little bit of dorkiness into it. But that's the best way to call myself. Or when someone asks me what I do, I usually answer with, I make money on the internet somehow, some way, by doing lots of little projects. And I've been largely working for myself for the last almost 10 years now. And about this projects. The thing I've been working on for the longest period of time is a startup called Wedding Lovely. And this has been 9 years of working on this. It's actually closing down in December, which is a whole other story for another time. I've learned so much from building this and running this startup. But it is going away, and I have lots of happy feelings about that. Ask me later. But the things I'm really working on right now are my books. And I have a set of 3 books. There's 2 called Hello Web App and Hello Web App Intermediate Concepts that teaches people how to build a web app actually using Python and Django. But the main one I'm promoting right now is my design book. So these books I've designed, developed them, I've wrote them, obviously, self-published them, and it's been a really fun series of projects to do. And I've also been experimenting with creating zines. So this is an introduction to the command line that I illustrated and wrote. And the other thing I do is I travel around and I speak at conferences, which is really, really awesome. So there's not enough Clueless gifs in this presentation. I apologize. I tried my best. Because when you name your presentation Clueless, you have to do it. But for every one of the projects that I work on, like everyone does, in hindsight, I look back and I was like, wow, I had no idea how much work it would be, what it would take for me to achieve some amount of success, what problems would arise. I've been throwing myself into these random projects for around, again, the last decade, and I've learned so much about this process. So this presentation, I'm kind of going through my background and how I built these projects and the big lessons I learned along the way, because there's a lot of funny stories. And to get started, I'm just going to start right at the beginning, which is my background. And it's really great to be here in Nashville because I'm a country girl. My family has a ranch. That's my dad and me, and grew up in the mountains around cows and horses and all that jazz. And that's one part of me. I really love I'm very outdoorsy. I go backpacking, hiking, rafting, all that. But I was really lucky to have family members who worked in tech. So this is my grandfather wearing his awesome, I love my IBM computer. He started work at IBM just out of high school and worked with them through his life until he retired. So he made sure that all of his grandkids had a computer. He gifted all of his grandkids a computer at their high school graduation. I would visit him, and I had a computer myself, and with the giant floppies. Does anyone remember those giant floppies? Those were the days. I had this little floppy, the thing where you could paw through all the floppies, the holder for it. Oh, so great. So I was living in a rural town. And who wants to go outside when you live in a rural town? I'm going to spend all my time on a computer. So I grew up staying inside on the computer. The internet happened in the 90s, and that's when HTML became a thing. There's no CSS, it's all frame-based websites, and I discovered a little hack for getting through high school, which was when a teacher assigned me a presentation or a report or whatnot, instead of writing so-and-so amount of words, I would write about half of what they wanted, but then I would put it on the internet on like a GeoCities website. And then, as a website. And then I go to my teacher and be like, oh, instead of writing this report and printing it out, I put it on the internet. And the teachers were like, oh, instant A. It was awesome. And the funny thing is that I built a lot of little websites in this time, and one of my websites is on Angel Fire, and Angel Fire is still around. So you guys get to see my high school website, which looks like this. This was like hot stuff back then. This was good design. I was actually in the running for it was like all my personal website stuff, but also for the fantasy author Terry Brooks. I was actually in the running to run his official website when I made this website. And you can't read it, so I'm just going to make it bigger for you. This site consists of Terry Brooks, the best author I've seen in a long time, sort of pathetic Java games, fan fiction, and short stories, and works of art, not to mention a message board and a chat room for all of you to enjoy. Like, man, the internet has changed so much. Look how innocent this was. I had a chat room on my website. So this is still live, you can find it. So because of my love of computers, and because I knew frame-based HTML, I thought that the perfect career for me would be jumping into computer science. So I ended up going to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in Central California, got into the computer science program. Day one, hour one, this is literally my first class. I marched into CSC 101, sat down, super excited to launch my career in computers, and the teacher just started going on and on about these subjects I had no idea about. It's probably like how the computer works and engineering and all these things, and I was sitting there looking like this, and everyone else is nodding, and I'm like, what's going on? Why does everyone know what's going on but me? And I actually ran after the professor after the class, asking him, did I miss a class? What's going on? He's like, no, you're fine, just stick with the program, it's cool. Part of the problem, at least for me, was that the program taught Java. And I found, and still find, Java really difficult to understand. I managed to pass the 101 class, and the 102 class, it's a quarter system at Cal Poly, it's three quarters in a traditional year. The 102 class covered GUIs, and that's when I was like, oh wait, I understand this, because I'm a visual person. I liked building websites before, and here I was creating things where you press a button, the button does something, and I was like, cool, I am getting computer science. And then I went into computer science 103. And 103 covered theory. One of the things we did, I just got this random screenshot of a bubble sort thing. One of the things we had to do was create a report where we're reverse engineering sorting methods and showing graphs, showing exactly why one sort is better than another sort. And this is not something I find fun at all. So my confusion in computer science program just magnified. I was trying really hard. I was with my grandfather and other family members that were working with computers at the time. And I knew that I really loved, I thought that I was a perfect candidate for a computer science degree. But I was struggling in this program, struggling in this class. I was going to tutoring and talking to professors, and I was doing everything I could and studying really, really hard. Until this one thing happened, where the professor gave me a project, and the project had a rubric. And the rubric was 40% for this and 20% for this. And if you're struggling like me, of course, you're going to look at that 40% and be like, that's the thing I'm going to focus on. And when the project came back to me, the professor had changed the rubric to something that caused me to have a lesser grade than I would have. So I did what anyone would do, as I emailed the professor and I said, hey, you changed the rubric, can I get the old one back? And this professor emailed me back saying that he would, but then he went on this long rant about how terrible I was, that I was not applying myself in computer science, that I needed to actually study, that I was just trying to skate through the program without even trying. And it broke me. Well, at first I was angry, so here's my second opportunity for a Clueless gift. But it broke me. And to have this figure in computer, like in my program, just telling me that they did not believe in me, and I was struggling so hard through that year, that was when I flipped the table and said I did not want to be in tech. I wasn't cut out for this, and I turned a complete 180, and I got an art degree instead. And I wasn't going to work with programming. I thought I hated programming. I thought I hated computers. I thought I hated working on the internet. Like, it's hard to explain, like, this whole, like, it sounds very dramatic now, but I was very frustrated back then. And I was going to become a wine label designer working in, like, California. Like, I was not going to have anything to do with programming. You know, as life kind of, like, I was like, this is my plan, but life was like, no, you're going to go back to computers. Because while I was in university, I started working at a startup, and the startup hired me to do some design work for them, and I kind of did the design and front-end stuff. And the funny thing about this is JavaScript was a thing, and normally a front-end developer does HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But I was so traumatized by my experience in Java. I know they're not the same thing, but it's Java and JavaScript, and JavaScript has the same curly brackets. That I refused to do any JavaScript at this company. So I was their front-end developer just working on HTML and CSS. So at the time, I thought that year and a half that I spent in the computer science program was wasted time. And I couldn't study abroad because when I switched my major and went to art, the requirements were so different that I ended up staying 5 years in school just so I can, that was the fastest I could finish. But in hindsight, looking back at that time, my background in that computer science program and my background in art has been a huge influence in my current career. This was the thing I look back on as something that taught me how difficult it is to work with code and work with tech, and that how different teaching styles can make a huge, huge difference. So speaking of that first job, let's talk about the scariest moment in my career. This job, I started at that job in school. It was literally a garage just down the street from the university, like very classic startup. So it was a bunch of dudes and me, and we're building this website, this like collection of websites, and we're all going to get rich together. So we went from that garage down the street from my school, moved to the Bay Area and had an office, and we're a startup. And this entire time, my friends, my bosses, my friends that I helped build this company with, kept telling me that, and the rest of the company, that they're keeping the salaries low because we're a startup, we're in this together, things are tight, all the excuses. And then I met one of the biggest influences in my career, which was actually my husband. The funny thing is that if you knew my husband, this is totally what he does. Somehow in the first couple dates, he wiggled out of me what I was being paid at my job, which is not something you usually share on a date. And I look back on that being like, why did I tell him that? And I told him at the time, working for this company I was making in the Bay Area, $53,000. And he was like, you are being underpaid. And I was like, no, I'm not. And I listed out to him all the excuses I had at this company. Oh, we're a startup. Oh, it's tight. We're a small team. We blah, 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 blah. And our first few dates just turned into me meeting him up for coffee and him taking me around and just yelling at me, well, not really yelling, but like negotiating with me when I told him every one of the excuses I had for why I should stay at this job and why I should keep this amount of money. Like one of the things I said is that there's a max 10% raise year over year, and I've gotten that every year. I started at 40K. And he's like, none of those things are set in stone. And he convinced me that he needed to ask for a raise at my next review. And he convinced me somehow to ask for a raise to $90,000 from 53, which is a gigantic jump. So the day of the raise came by and sat down with my bosses, and they, of course, did the whole thing about, oh, you've done so great this year, and you've hit all your targets, and we're going to give you the max 10% raise, yay. And I had to sit there, and scared, super, super scared. And I said, thank you for the 10% raise, but I looked at the salaries for the Bay Area for my position, and I think I'm worth 85. Because at the last moment, I panicked. Instead of saying 90, I said 85. And the funniest part is I went back to Andre, and I said, Oh, I panicked the last moment. I said 85, and he's like, I knew you would. That's why I told you 90. Manipulated. So my bosses went white, and they said I had to leave the room, and I went back out to the office, and the whole company is only 13 people. But I was convinced that I was fired or laid off or whatever. And about half an hour went by, and my bosses came back to me, and they said that they thought about my request, and that they were going to offer me a raise to 82 instead, which is a 55% raise, which is amazing. And I walked back to my desk just like completely gobsmacked that it worked. And so I had a little celebration, and then I started thinking, and then I got a little annoyed, because you know what? They knew that I was being underpaid. This entire time, it was too easy. Them saying like, oh, they don't have enough money. Oh, they have a max 10% raise and whatnot. I realized that there was no reason for them to pay me more until I asked for it. This is the moment that taught me for the rest of my career that it's up to me for me to know what I am worth, and it's up to me to ask for it. And it's really, really scary to do those things in your career or whatever, when you're negotiating contracts or when you're trying to get a new position or you're trying to get a raise. It's so scary to take both of those steps. But it was a huge pivotal moment for the rest of my career. So the funny thing is, after that happened, I got annoyed. I was like, screw it, I'm working for myself. I got my raise, that was cool, passed over that little hump. So I'm gonna quit. And I was in the Bay Area, and everyone and their mother had a startup, and I thought, hey, why not make a startup too? So I wrote this blog post. And the funny thing is, I wrote this blog post. I'm looking for a technical co-founder because I'm still terrified of coding. I don't want to do anything that has to do with programming or any of the technical work. Like, I was going to be the visionary, which is so ridiculous looking back on that. But I wrote this blog post, and I wrote out what I wanted to do. Working in the wedding industry, as a designer, I wanted to work with wedding invitation designers and help them get more customers and help people work with custom designers rather than like the online businesses. Not really a wedding person myself. I actually eloped, which is funny about working in the wedding industry. But I wrote this blog post, and I went through this whole hullabaloo where it went big on Hacker News, and I was like fielding all these emails, and I'm going out to coffee, and then working with some people to find my perfect co-founder, and I'm like, I am doing this right. And I wasn't, because as soon as we started working together on our full project, the person I chose, we exploded. And then I was back to square one, where I had an idea for something I wanted to build, no one to build it, and I had to figure out how to either go and get a real job again, or finally look back at that university experience and get over it and learn how to build something. So I actually jumped into Python, and I built this little web app using the Django framework. This is about 9 years ago. And I wrote about that as well. And I built this little website here, and things started to take off. And I was really lucky this period of time. Wedding Lovely has had so many roller coaster moments over the years, but this is right when it was taking off. I built this website, and I was able to turn it into conference talks, and I got into 500 Startups in the Bay Area, the incubator program, and I got into the Designer Fund in the Bay Area. And the funny thing is if you looked at my programming, my code under the hood, this is something from the GitHub repository. And looking at this now, of course I know how to improve this. This is, anyone, even if you're not a coder, you can see that this is probably not efficient. So the code underneath, I wasn't a programmer, but I was building something that customers and people could use and share. And I was learning so much because I would write this, but it worked, and it allowed me to move on to something else and learn how to add payments with PayPal, which is a pain in the butt, and add payments with Stripe, which is less of a pain in the butt, and how to do this feature and that feature. As I was growing this website, I taught myself more and more about how to code and how to do marketing and how to do sales and all that jazz. And I was able to go to conferences and hawk this as a real live startup, being the only coder for it. I shouldn't do that. I am a coder. I got investment in all that. I was building this company, and it was this really awesome experience. And I was so happy that I got over that fear of working on the computer and working with code from my university days. So some lessons learned from this period of time in my life. That there's a lot of programmers out there who insist that when you're building something that uses customers, it needs to be perfect, it needs to be efficient, you need to have, like fancy servers and all that. And this experience taught me that it's far more important to get something up and out, and don't worry about how it's like perfect. Make sure there's no security issues, of course, but get something out and start working with customers as fast as possible. And that if you're learning something new, this is funny because I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and that's actually their motto is learn by doing. So somewhere there's a university person who's like, yes, she's using it. But learning by doing, like that's how this university and working with theory and all that didn't work for my brain. It worked better for me to pick up tech and code by working on a real project. And I also learned that I really like working on startups because it's a crazy roller coaster. And again, I'm shutting it down this year, and it probably should have been shot a couple of years ago. Again, whole other story. It's been 9 years of fun. But it has been 9 years of fun, and I've been able to work for myself running the startup and gaining employees and laying off employees. But I'm so happy that I've been able to work on this project, and I've learned so much. Like I said, it's been 9 years. And in the middle of that 9 years, there was a period of time where I was going to be acquired by Etsy, and that fell through, and then I had to lay off everybody, and then I had gained a co-founder, and that co-founder quit on me randomly, and then I was working on it myself, and so I put the thing into maintenance mode, and I was like, what's next? Why not write a book? That's going to be easy, right? No. The experience of working on Wedding Lovely taught me, and the experience in university, I taught myself how to build a web app using these online tutorials, but after I learned, I figured out what the tutorial was trying to say, and I applied it to what I was building. And then I looked back at that tutorial, and I was like, wait, I think I could teach this. I would teach this a different way. And these lessons kept piling up and piling up. At the time, there weren't any tutorials that had a customizable tutorial. Something that you could read a tutorial, but you can build something unique for yourself. And I was looking for a tutorial that was more project-based and theory-based. I didn't want to talk about what's going on in the background. I wanted to be like, here's how you build a thing. And I wanted a tutorial that didn't assume a background in programming, because there's a lot of things where like, hey, use this thing. Okay, let's talk about what's going on in the database. And that my brain would be like, rah, 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 when I was reading that. And when I figured it out, I thought there should be a way of teaching where we get you from 0 to 1, just get something up and out there, and then you can figure out what's going on with databases and servers and stuff. And I wanted a tutorial that was small. So you look at some learn how-to books, and they're like, pfft. And I'm like, no, I don't want that. I want something like small and light and easy to read. And I wanted something that was good looking, because we're working in tech. There's a lot of ugly things out there that are aimed at people jumping into tech. And as a designer, I was really inspired by A Book Apart, and they're gorgeous, gorgeous books. And I wanted to have, if I was going to build something for myself, I wanted to have it something like this. So speaking of A Book Apart, they're awesome. They do such good stuff for front end. And I thought I would like to do this myself, but if I could get into A Book Apart, then my career is set, because those people are awesome, and if I can get into that group. So I tried. I emailed them so many times. I emailed them beforehand, and they're like, no. And then I wrote the book, and I emailed them again. They're like, still no, which was a little frustrating, but I understand. And I did get some acceptances. I did take this book idea and go to other publishers. And this is No Starch Press. No Starch is a really good player in the industry for publishing. And they're very clear about their royalties, that if you get 15% of the royalty without an advance, which is your money up front, 12% royalty with a $5,000 advance, or 10% royalty with $8,000 advance, which is pretty okay for a person writing their first book. But I'm burnt out on this startup, and I have right now, at the time, plenty of time. So why not, for a lot more effort, just do the whole thing, which is what I do. So this is when I turned to Kickstarter, and I am a huge fan of Kickstarter, not just for physical projects, but for even, it's funny talking about open source projects. A lot of people have raised money on Kickstarter for open source as well. And it's been a really good platform for getting some initial money when you're trying to build something. And this is another place where I kind of threw myself into not knowing exactly what was going on, because Kickstarter, I've done 4 Kickstarters now, and I call them 30 days of hell. Like, it's a really, really tough, stressful period of time. I'm a huge fan of it. I will always use it for my projects. And if you're launching your own project of whatever ilk, and you want to go on Kickstarter, like, I'm happy to help out, because I've learned a lot, but there's a lot of crying the first time around when I did it. But long story short, the Kickstarter was successful, and to launch my very first book. And in the video, which is the hardest part of a Kickstarter, my friend did my videos, and she always put outtakes at the end. And I thought, why not show the outtakes instead of showing a whole video, because that's more fun. So let's see if this works. Try one more time.
I don't know what to say.
No. Okay. Oh wait, there it is.
Best book ever. It's a care package of cookies. Baked goods or cookies in a care package.
Talking on a video is really hard.
Bacon pancakes. Bye.
That's my doggy. I have another one later. So I was working in the startup, burnt out from the startup, decided to write a book to help people jump into building their own projects like I did, which is funny when I think about it. I'm burnt out. Here, you be burnt out too. Not really. Kickstarter and running these projects and launching these projects and running the startup really taught me the importance of keeping marketing in mind. I didn't really touch on that before, but one of the nicest parts about doing a pre-order campaign or creating an email list before you launch something you're building or doing a Kickstarter is you get to start doing some marketing and get people to know about your project. When I build things, of course, I'm a product person. I'm a designer and I like to develop, but I'm not a marketer. And I really wish I could build something and release it into the world and people would just find it. How great would that be? But that's not what happens. In Kickstarter or like keeping marketing in mind when launching a product is so, so important to get into the right hands. And the other nice thing about Kickstarter are these other fundraising things that it's a nice way of asking your friends for money. And a lot of friends took a chance on me and gave me some money, and I succeeded on getting my Kickstarter goals. But of course, then I was like, oh crap, now I actually have to make the book. Yay. Just blop. So just some lessons learned from the releasing a full book. Of course, projects, every project, any project we're working on usually takes way longer than you think. So the book, when I said I'm going to write a book and I'm going to release this tutorial, the book actually got into people's hands a year after I said that was going to happen. So that means at the 6-month point, I'm just like panicking and working really hard, and I keep getting these emails from people being like, I gave you money in the Kickstarter and I haven't gotten my book yet. And I would just like be devastated every single time I got these emails. And I'm like, I'm so sorry, I'm still working on it. Please read the updates. I've been trying to do a lot of updates. And it got to the point where I had to get my husband to read my email for me, because whenever these emails jumped in, it would just derail my day. So he would read the emails and he would respond to me in an archive and I wouldn't have to see them. I ended up writing a book, and just a little quick note on if you're doing any kind of writing tutorials or whatnot, there's so many writing systems out there, and I've decided just to announce to the world that I'm just going to do Google Docs for everything, because the Google Docs like editing and suggestions interface is so much better. And I'll use Google Docs and I'll export to Markdown, but Google Docs has been a life changer for me for actually writing and getting these books out. So some lesson learned on this experience of building a book, and pretty much everything, is to keep things simple. One of the things that helped me out when I was learning how to code and launching Wedding Lovely was that I launched with a very, very basic web app that had nearly no features. And with the book, again, I wasn't looking at doing a big book. The first book I wrote was about 18,000 words, which is like, what, 7 to 8 significant blog posts? And keeping my project small and easy to launch, like A, it's kind of lazy, I guess, but B, means I got things out faster than it would have otherwise. And of course, building a bigger buffer when building something that people are waiting for. And I've learned that lesson for every other Kickstarter. I've been able to fulfill my Kickstarters on time for the future books because I've learned such a huge lesson from that first book that I wrote. So, I kind of went through, I produced the book, and I used InDesign for that. There's things like LaTeX and whatnot. But this was another fun, learn to code process. I mean, in terms of, here's something I don't know, and how do I learn about it? And I took some editorial design classes in college, but that's a nice thing about the internet, is for anything you're trying to learn, there's probably going to be a video about it. And I heavily use Skillshare, because there's a lot of really great design videos on there to teach me how to produce the book, which is another reason why it took so long, because I had to relearn all this. Anyways, lessons learned. But I used Skillshare to learn InDesign and format this book. The funny thing is that if I just did an ebook, it would be so much easier to get a book out, because it'd be like, okay, write in Markdown, use something like LeanPub, which is a really great service for creating ebooks, and then it's done. But I did admittedly get myself a huge hurdle by actually having a physical book. But InDesign allows me to go through and line by line adjust the kerning and the line height and make sure the code snippets look good. And it was the way for me to combine my graphic design backgrounds with what I learned in tech so far. One of the best parts about doing your own book and not having a publisher is they can't tell you no. So this is the dedication in the beginning, which not only uses a word that does not exist in the dictionary, it's a purpose, but the very last paragraph talks about my dog peeing on the bed, which is, I'm pretty sure any sane editor would be like, don't put that as the first page of your book, but I stand by it. And because when I was writing the dedication, literally my dog, I was like, oh, it'd be cute to write a dedication to say thank you to my pets, but my dog just peed on the bed last night. Ooh, I'll put that in there. Crazy decisions. But I was writing a book to help people do a tech topic, and they're so stodgy. So I wanted something that had, on the very first page, told you that this book does not take itself seriously. So this is where that art background combined perfectly with my techie side, building this project and writing these books and getting it out in people's hands. So I wrote more books, and there's, the one I'm working on, I finished, and I'm promoting right now is the design book. And it's a book, the tech book was kind of here's how to get designers to do more, to get into programming or start working with that. I wanted to write a book that helped programmers get into design, the other side of the coin. So we'll see if this works. I have to warn you, apparently. Yeah? Thanks for watching. Oh, that'll work. Thanks for watching. Oh, that's not gonna work. I don't know why it's off. Yeah, okay. They're funny, I swear. It's just me being a dork, which is kind of nice in the middle of this presentation. And I'm here's just me doing weird things. All right, so, and then this is the other thing about doing an ebook. If you're writing tutorials or whatnot online, it's really nice just to keep them as as a digital product, because when you're trying to fulfill a book, getting the book printed is one thing, and then just trying to get the book in people's hands has been such a trial. So this is me with my first book, and I ended up getting them printed, shipped to my home, filled into a closet, and I had to go through and put all these things in, and print out these labels and put them into these sleeves and take them to the United States Postal Service and get them shipped out. And this was a pain in the butt. This was the worst part of the entire process. Of all the things I went through, shipping and fulfillment is the worst part. Part of it was my fault, because what I was doing, I was going through and making the labels by hand. And I thought that's how you had to do it. So I would go to USPS.com. This is for the international orders. And there's a thing in the US called media mail for shipping books for way cheaper. But for some reason, there's an agreement with PayPal in the United States Postal Service where PayPal is the only place where you can create labels for media mail. So I had to go to these 2 different websites and use PayPal and upload my files and download these labels. And there was at some point where it was just kind of like there has to, like 6 months of me doing this for hundreds of orders. And I was like, wait, isn't there a better way? Oh, right, I know how to do some programming. Of course there's going to be some way of doing this. This is still that fear of programming coming into play. Because my initial instinct for anything I have to do, even though I've been in this world for so long, is to use the online GUI approach and then realize way later on that there's a way for me to do it programming that's way easier. And I should just use that from the beginning. So there's this thing called EasyPost. And EasyPost gives you an API for interacting with most, like the United States Postal Service. I use it in Canada now for Canada Post. There's most of the Postal Service around the world. It allows you to create a script or whatever and output labels. So I ended up creating this little script. And it was like something I had done years and years and years later. After I started working on the startup and calling myself a developer and getting the startup and getting fundraising for it. But I was still struggling with the idea that I could fix problems by poking at code. And writing this script, that aha moment afterwards kind of was like, I'm still struggling with this getting over this hump. I've gotten better. I've learned a lot from it. But it's just, that's me. And I think there's a lot of people out there who are like me. And hopefully every time I do it, I'm grateful. And hopefully this will inspire people who don't feel comfortable with code that you're not alone. I talked a little bit about this already. It's really awesome. I have some here. To be able to walk to conferences and be like, here's a paperback book. There's so much that goes into building a physical product. And if you're considering doing the same thing, especially if you're writing tutorials or you want to write a longer tutorial for how to do something in tech, I mean, you can do an ebook, but it's so cool to have a physical product. So even though I complained a little bit about the struggles of building and getting these books out, if you're considering doing the same thing, please come talk to me and ask me questions. I'll give you all the information you need because I've gone through this, because it's so cool to have a physical book. So to wrap up, in a nutshell, so this has been my journey. This is kind of where I've gone to in tech, and a lot of it's just been learning things as I go and going through some awful experiences, but those awful experiences led to me learning something fundamental that I was able to apply to my career. And these books that I've written would not exist if I didn't have that earlier experience in computer science. I love to build products, and that's why I call myself an entrepreneur, or just tell people I make money off the internet. Because, I don't know, I think I'm unhireable. I actually did apply for some jobs, and none of them have gone back to me, which is a little frustrating. But I like to build these things. I like to make my own hours, and it's really awesome to build a product and get it in people's hands. I have not made a lot of money off of this. I can tell you more in person if you want to ask. But it's allowed me to travel and speak at conferences, and people will come to conferences to have my book, and they're like, I have your book. And I went to Australia and someone had my book, and that was so cool. It's been a really cool process. And if you are looking into starting a startup or building a physical product or anything like that, I'd be happy to help if you have any questions. So if you have, for those questions, like I said, I'm Lime Daring on the internet, and Lime Daring, like Twitter. I also use Mastodon. And thank you so much for having me here.